All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today I'll be discussing Alex Grinch potentially being replaced by Jim Leonhard at USC. This is pure speculation, but there's a lot of people led to believe that the former Wisconsin defensive play caller and interim head coach, he's going to be, looking for a big-time job, and USC could potentially be that one. Alex Grinch, he's been with Lincoln Riley since 2019, all the way back to their time at Oklahoma. One thing that might plague Lincoln Riley and hinder his ability to, accomplish big goals in Los Angeles is loyalty to his staff. That's something that is certainly a big topic of discussion, and long-term we'll have to see what he does. He has claimed that there will be changes coming to the staff, or in the program, rather, and I think Grinch is a good stepping stone for USC. Obviously, it's not great to fire a guy after just one season, but I think for USC, it's certainly something that definitely needs to be discussed because they had 41 points per game this year. Caleb Williams won the Heisman Trophy, 4,800-plus yards, 52 total touchdowns, only 5 interceptions. Twice this year, Caleb Williams had 400-plus yards and 5-plus touchdowns. And two of those losses, they lost by a point. And those were the numbers he had in those games. I mean, that's just absurd when your quarterback plays that good and you're unable to win those games because your defense gives up 43 and 46 points respectively, 15-point lead with about 3.5 to go in the Cotton Bowl, and they lost that game despite a brilliant effort from Williams all day long. He had 400 passing yards in 3 quarters in that game. Alex Grinch, the bar wasn't too high to begin with, but considering this defense was an opportunistic unit, I think a lot of people were impressed, by their ability to force turnovers. That's something they did exceptionally well. But if they weren't that opportunistic, I think they would have been a lot worse, well over 30 points per game allowed, on top of the 424 yards per game they allowed this season. A little bit worse than last year's unit by about 15 yards. 2 points per game less as well. So, it was pretty much the same unit as last. One thing I said about USC coming into the year is they just needed to learn to play defense again. Learn the basic fundamentals. They took a lot of poor angles under Clancy Pendergast. Clay Helton's tenured defense was certainly something that continued to get worse under them. The secondary was asked to hold up for too long in coverage because the pass rush was not active. This year, USC had a phenomenal pass rush. They also, of course, had those turnovers, but I think with the 40 sacks they had, that's certainly a number that was not expected from this football team. Last year, they only had 21, so they doubled up on that number. 13.5 coming from Tuipulotu, unanimous first-team All-American, 46 tackles, 22 tackles for loss on top of that as well. There was 3 elite players on this USC defense, and it was pretty much the same unit as last year, Tuipulotu being one of them. Mekhi Blackman, phenomenal transfer corner from Colorado. And then Kalen Bullock as well. He was a great ball hawk for them. I think there's other guys that had some impressive moments at times. Tyrone Talani was a good run stopper for them. Corey Foreman, he had that game-winning pick against UCLA. I think he was a really good run stopper as well. Latrell McCutcheon from his cornerback spot. This was a defense that certainly had bright spots from certain guys. But overall, you look at the defensive line, for example. Tuipulotu was great. I just talked about the Kansas State transfer in Talani, and he was second on the team with tackles for loss. But after that, it was a unit that really wavered. They did not dominate with size. The run stopping was not there. The penetration just was not evident. And Tuipulotu lines up in a variety of spots. So that's certainly a guy that was able to thrive in whatever position he was lined up in. 160 rushing yards allowed per game, 29 touchdowns, 5 yards per carry. This was a run defense that was awful, 300-plus against Tulane on only 34 attempts. That's 9 yards a carry. That was fresh off a game against Utah in the Pac-12 title game where they were just awful. In the second half of the year, USC, I thought they were a little bit better against the run, but for the most part, consistency was not there at all when it came to stopping it. And, USC's biggest problem is fundamentals, the inability to tackle, heads-up IQ plays. They're not there. That's not evident. The secondary also struggled immensely to tackle this year. This is a talented unit, too. They forced a lot of interceptions, Bullock leading the way. He had 5 of them, 19 total picks for the secondary. For the defense as a whole, Shane Lee did have 2. Raylan Gorforth and Eric Gentry had 1. Max Williams, this is a defense that certainly just really struggled, and I feel like the talent is certainly better than what we saw out of this unit. It was horrendous, especially the last 2 games. The tackling was just horrendous. They gave up, 28 missed tackles, on the game against Utah in the Pac-12 title game. 442 total missed tackles this season. The linebackers led the way in that. Even Tuipulotu, who was an elite defender, he had 15 missed tackles, which is second on the team, behind 2 linebackers in Lee and Gentry. Starters. So, this defense certainly lacks playmaking from its front 7. They do not have a lot of size. They do not have bullies. And, of course, we'll get to Jim Leonhard, and we'll talk about how that's going to certainly be one thing that can really uplift this program, but that's where it needs to start. They just do not play with a lot of physicality. They're very soft. Just a lot of boneheaded plays from the entire defense, and despite having 3 elite players, they were just not good. And I think that's where USC certainly needs to start, is to try to beef up the trenches, get some linebackers that can certainly play with a little more oomph, a little bit more energy. Alex Grinch at Oklahoma, though, in 2020, the defense was quite good. Under 22 points per game, 250 yards per contest, 12 touchdowns allowed to 16 picks through the air, 55% comp rate. I think Alex Grinch is certainly a solid defensive coordinator, but is he the answer at USC? Long term, it doesn't seem like it's going to be on par with the offense with Grinch as the play caller. And looking, too, why Jim Leonhard is the perfect replacement. He employs a physical 3-4 defense with a very violent defensive line. They're big, they're physical, and that's one thing USC certainly lacks. And if you want to compete for national championships, that's going to be the best way to do it. You see these teams have these elite offenses, don't really seem to be on par with their defense. I think Ohio State's a good example of that. As of late, their offense has been phenomenal. They're pumping out first-round prospects like it's nothing, but their defense has not been able to live up to any type of hype, no billing at all for them. They've not really progressed very well themselves. 8 players ended up drafted off that unit that Alex Grinch had in 2020, so I certainly think his ability to work with talent is something that is evident. I do believe he can do that. But USC right now, they're not exactly recruiting good on defense. They've added some great DBs, at least in last year's class. Damani Jackson, Zion Branch, Fabian Ross. Those were the top 3 recruits they added. Lincoln Riley, of course, he showed up late, so he kind of had to scrap that class together, did a lot of work in the portal, and they were able to help beef up some of the depth, but it's certainly long away from being a complete unit. This is a very good secondary with ball hawks, but when it comes to holding up in coverage, making tackles, that's something they certainly lack the ability to do, which is very shocking with the athleticism they possess. And that's one thing Jim Leonhard can certainly help with, is him being a former superstar defensive back. He's great at developing defensive backs, but more importantly, back to that 3-4, he gets a lot of play from his linebackers. They play with discipline, they contain, a lot of fire into the backfield. I think that one thing that Jim Leonhard could certainly work with immediately is not just Mason Cobb, the Oklahoma State transfer. I think Tackett Curtis, an athletic linebacker with speed, and then Braylon Shelby, another guy they picked up. There's only 4 or 5 stars coming to USC in this recent recruiting class, so they're not recruiting very well, and that's not going to help out Alex Grinch compared to a guy in Jim Leonhard who's mainly worked with 3-star guys, a handful of 4-star talent there, but he's been great at utilizing these 3-star worst talents, under-recruited guys. He gets them into his system, and they seem to thrive. So he certainly has an eye for talent. Keanu Benton, a big-time nose tackle for him this year at Wisconsin, really stood out in the middle of that 3-4, strong nose in the middle. And again, it was just a violent, tough defense that starts with that defensive line. They fight, and they unlock the opportunities for the linebackers to thrive, not just off the outside, but on the inside as well. Every year, the tackle for loss and sack leaders seem to come from that inside linebacking core. He just develops those guys so great. I think you want to look at Nick Herbig, for example, a guy that was actually a high-end 4-star recruit. And when he gets talent like that, they certainly thrive. They're elite players, 15.5 tackles for loss for Herbig this year, 11 sacks. This is just a defense at Wisconsin that has been great time after time again. Top 10 in total defense each of the last 4 years. Number 1 ranked run defense a season ago. This past year, they were also really good. And they don't give up a whole lot. The only times that they've given up over 200 yards as of late was against Ohio State. Obviously that's a game where they were on the field for 70 plays. That was the second most all year. And they only allowed 200 once in the last 3 years, and that was against the Buckeyes. So, this is a team that's great in the trenches. They even played Army, and they held them to under 200. I think it was last year in a game. So this is a defense. They start with physicality up front. They do not give up much. Over the back half of the year, from the 23rd of October for the rest of the year, they only gave up 101 yards as its max. So over the back half of the season, no one was doing anything against them. They weren't playing the toughest of offenses by any means, but they did play a Minnesota offense that thrives at running the football, held them to 75 yards on 37 attempts. And that's the theme here. They did the same thing to Michigan, and this is in 2021 rather. But this is just a defense that is great, and they get better as the season goes on. They did the same thing here over the back half of this season as well. They had another 37 attempts on defense against Minnesota, held them to 97 rushing. 112 from the 15th of October on was the most they allowed on the ground. This is just a team that they're great at stopping the run, and that's where they want to start. And USC, that's one thing they've really struggled with. They do not have aggression in its front seven, and Leonhard being mixed in with being a great defensive back coach. This just seems like the perfect play for USC. I think they would certainly continue to win in the portal. They have right now Kion Barsh coming over from Arizona, Christian Roland Wallace, the aforementioned Mason Cobb as well. And this is a team that's going to continue to win in the portal, I think, both sides of the ball. And with Jim Leonhard's ability to, pluck some of these younger talented guys, or lower-ranked guys, rather, in recruiting is certainly going to be a big plus for wherever he lands up, and I think that's something USC certainly needs because you can having an eye for talent is an important thing. A guy like Jay Shaw came over for Wisconsin this year; he was elite in the secondary for them, and John Tricino as well, a veteran defensive back. It's been around for a while, and this is a team that replaced a lot of veterans in their secondary with a lot of transfers, and they're able to thrive for Wisconsin. So I think Jim Leonhard just seems to be a perfect pairing overall. Because USC, they're going to be able to get some of those younger guys that not a lot of people are talking about. And, their highest offer is going to be from USC, and Leonhard's going to be able to pluck them into his system, and they're going to thrive. And just overall, they need better help in the front seven. They need more aggression. They need better fundamentals as well, better toughness. And I think that's the move that needs to be made for Lincoln Riley to put USC on the best path for success, because I think if they do that, if they had just a quarter bit of a defense better, they'd probably be in the playoffs. They were giving up maybe just like 50 yards less or 3 points less, they would have probably been in the playoffs. Just a little bit better of a pulse for this defense would have gotten them in the playoffs. So I think Jim Leonhard coming over, it's got to be the best decision here. Riley, very loyal to Alex Grinch, of course, it appears. But the move needs to be made for USC to be successful long term. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. This would be one of the top coaching staffs in college football, and I think it'd certainly be feared, especially with the move to the Big Ten coming up. And, Jim Leonhard has recruited in that conference for years now. So, all in all, this has got to be the move here. Mike Bond, I think, needs to call Lincoln Riley into his office and tell him that this needs to be a move they need to make together for the best interest of the program. So, for today's episode, guys. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.